All right, let's talk about Quasi's post. He says it's spicy. Brian said it's spicy. He said you got to watch this. And I don't actually think there's anything that spicy here. So that's the big take. But I do want to go ahead and kind of expand on a couple points he makes. If you're not familiar with Quasi, he is probably one of the people that is working the hardest and is doing all of the right things to most likely be one of those rare play buttons in the Final Fantasy XIV community. So very exciting to see him cross 60,000. So go over there and hit subscribe if you haven't already. And on top of that, he is really good at vocally representing a lot of the newer faces within the community. You know, they come in through either Shadowbringers or Endwalker, but he does so from a point of, at this point, an incredible amount of information. He covers news posts, he covers interviews, he's done a huge variety of the content in the game and understands it and is well versed in it. And so he does a good job representing both what it's like to be somebody taking on all of this content for the first time and feeling those fresh eyes, but also, you know, bringing in some context of freshly having come from other games, and yet doing it from a point of, at this point, like an incredibly broad breadth of information. And so I do appreciate that. We have seen him kind of going through the life cycle of new players, and so, you know, this is timed around the same time that, like, Zeppla recently put out a post that's on kind of the same subject, right? What is this kind of, does Final Fantasy need to change? Is this burnout? And there is this question of, is player burnout something that happens to the player, or is it something that the game does? And it's a topic Brian and I have had for years, but I wanted to kind of go over some of Quasi's thoughts on it.
This will be a spicy video. Today we're talking about haters. Now, for the longest time, I've been covering Final Fantasy XIV on YouTube. Naturally, in the YouTube comments, there will always be haters. But a certain common voice is getting louder and louder. I'm starting to see more and more hateful comments about how there's no content in Final Fantasy XIV. Now, I've responded to some of these comments in the past, but as we get closer to 6.2, their voices have intensified. So I figured instead of answering one by one, I'll make a video, I'll answer everything at one go, so I'll just point people to the video in the future. Now, I wouldn't read all the hateful comments. Let me read out the parts and the accusations around there not being enough content in Final Fantasy XIV. And obviously, the names are censored for their own good. A certain someone said that I couldn't stop playing PvP Crystalline Conflict because the 6.1 basically had no content. I finished everything in 4 hours or something. This is totally not enough content, although the irony here is that I was enjoying playing Crystalline Conflict, and I think that's content. So there's some irony here, and we'll be talking about this in a bit. Another someone says, the more money and popularity, the less content we seem to get. In this other comment, it says the game is so dead right now, content comes out, we blow through it so fast, and there's nothing to do. Content should take time to go through. He should probably try the critically criticized time-gated mechanics in World of Warcraft. Time-gated content that you can't blow through. Maybe you'll understand how frustrating that is. And you think it's just YouTube comments. It's also in the Final Fantasy XIV general forums.
Okay, so real quick, let's just stop and talk about this. Some of these contents, some of these questions. So first of all, I think a lot of these questions come from, in my experience, watching people kind of go through their personal life cycle with the game. The game has been consistent to a fault, almost to the point that it's a flaw. Having covered the game, while yes, ARR is very different than Endwalker in many ways when compared directly to each other, when you look at how much, like, all of gaming has changed, when you look at how much World of Warcraft tosses, like, their entire progression system out the door and brings in a whole new one every expansion, which doesn't feel good, and you look at new games that have come out and are tackling things in totally different ways and their own take on things, Final Fantasy has been consistent to a fault. We always get 5 content patches. Each of those get at least a half patch, oftentimes 1 or 2 more little ones when something like an Ultimate or World Visit or something needs to be separated out to stand on its own. And in addition to that, those content patches are highly predictable. So to people that are very frustrated with 6.1, I just want to stop and address that because he doesn't take on the specific content that's in a 6.1 versus a 6.2 patch. Maybe because, like, he's already covering a ton of meat in this video, but also maybe because while Quasi is incredibly well versed on the game where it stands today, this pattern is something that just slowly grinds into your bones, and you either appreciate that, right, like a tattoo or a brand, or it's something that kind of grates on you because it does repeat. So point 1, point 3, point 5 are the casual patches. Those are the 24-man Alliance raids. They come with, that acts as a form of loot catch-up for the general population. This is a great time for us to generally progress side stories, beast tribes, things like that. The even-numbered patches are your big hitting progression. 0.0, 0.2, 0.4. That is your savage content. Now, ultimates have been anything less than predictable. So yes, this 0.1 got an ultimate. I'm aware that is not casual content, but it's not like every single 0.1 for all of history has gotten an ultimate, and we're not guaranteed that 7.1 will get an ultimate. So I would say that's more of just a statement about 6.1 and less of the pattern. The even number patches is when we kind of hard reset gear. So if you're going to take breaks, coming back at 0.2 or 0.4 is a great time if you're somebody that likes to chase best in slot, to come back right before those and run through Savage a few more times just in case you're missing those last few pieces, and then grind through progression again. It is not uncommon in this game for people to play the 0.0 patch and then take a break until like 0.5 and come back and blast it all down. There is a huge number of ways to play 14. As long as you're having fun and you're not taking away from somebody else's fun, you're doing it correctly. Then there's this idea, okay, well then why is 0.1 so light? Well, remember that 0.0 is the single largest patch that we get, because it's a full freestanding expansion. It comes with new zones, it comes with zone-based features, so those range from kind of fates, rare fates, bicolored gemstones, sightseeing points, triple triad, hunts, which includes like the hunts that you hunt on trains, but also the solo hunts that you should be doing if you're still trying to level. There is a ton of side quests. They are later going to have beast tribes added. There's a lot to do, in addition to things like the way gatherers interact with those zones, etc., which once again, the gathering points expand and grow over the course of an expansion to stop people from kind of stockpiling that stuff and breaking that system. So for anybody that's like, how do I prep for the next Savage tier? Well, if any of the gathering nodes are what's needed, you can't prep for those other than get lots of rest and make sure you're already best in slot on Gatherer, which you should be able to do. It's fairly attainable, assuming you're willing to, either put in the work or the gil. So that's what comes with a 0.0 patch, which means we get all new levels. I think it was something like 440 levels across all the classes, but like not all levels are created equal. And so it's a great chance to try multiple classes. Yoshi has said multiple times when asked how they balance jobs, we don't balance them so that you can get your entire play experience out of one main job. If you perfect a job, we encourage you to try another. That's why the loot system works the way it does. That's why the character system works the way it does. We encourage that. So what I would say is the 0.1 patch is the lightest of the content patches when compared to 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. When you start to add in things like Relic, you start to add in things like side stories, things like when we get into a trial series, the raid series, of course, progresses. The 0.1 patch and the 0.15 patch is never that big, in my opinion, because you still have a lot of 0.0 content. I finished all the 0.1 content very, very quickly. I finished all the 0.15 content very, very quickly. I agree with that feeling. But that is like, okay, thank God. Now I can get back to finishing leveling my jobs all to 90. Now I can get back to, I'm about to go back and finish my first anima weapon, because I've never finished one. And so now I can go back and I can complete these other tasks, which he is going to kind of touch on. As far as the July or August in this comment right here, my prediction is August 9th. I put up a video kind of just counting out the weeks for everybody. The roadmap is effectively 8 weeks, patch to patch. That puts the half patch at, or 8 weeks to there, 2 months, and then 4 months to the full patch. So 16 weeks. We would be looking at 16 weeks, but then we take an extra week in the summer and an extra week in the winter. So when we build those in, it's 16 or 17 weeks, with 8 to 9 weeks in between each one. So my prediction is August 9th. I am planning for August 16th because I would rather be wrong because it's early. And so that's how I'm basing my time. And then keep in mind that we always get 2 live letters per patch. The first one of those will be on July 1st. They will announce when the second one is. The second one is always right at that kind of 2 weeks from patch day.
As you guys can see from the background of the text, and I quote, "Where's the long-lasting content?" With reference to the patch 6.15 content, the Tataru quest, the Omega quest, this person says, "I completed both in about an hour and a half. So where exactly is all these new long-lasting content? We still have to wait for what? July or August for 6.2 question mark? And I think you guys might enjoy this. And I quote, "World of Warcraft sucks right now, but if I chose to subscribe right now, I would still have plenty to do every day or week. Whether that stuff is actually fun To do or not may be another story, but it's still there. Now keep in mind this comment because we'll be coming back to it in this video. But you guys get the point. And so today, I like to discuss this topic. Before we jump right in, do consider subscribing to the channel if you like the content. We broke 60,000 subscribers with your help. I really appreciate your support. First thing first, I don't think it's a fair statement to say that Final Fantasy XIV has no content, especially if you choose not to do certain types of content. If you want to go off on the very deep hardcore end of things, you can be raiding, not only at a savage level, you can do it at an ultimate level. Most statics are still progging through the Dragon Song Ultimate, which many people have dubbed as one of the best ultimates in many years. And if that's not good enough, you...
So he's going to address this a little bit more later on kind of how the casual side works, but I will say if Final Fantasy XIV can be grouped into, let's say, 15 buckets of content, and in ARR it was only 10 buckets of content, so we have more buckets. Each bucket is probably a little more full than it used to be outside of like number of dungeons per patch. But when you see the total amount of content grow and your bucket only gets a little bit more, it doesn't feel good. And so it is easy to see the total number of buckets that the resources are getting spread across, especially when people are frustrated to see Square Enix put those resources into games outside of Final Fantasy XIV, knowing that some of those resources come from just how successful this game has been. That is where those kind of feelings can originate from. Whether or not you agree with them, that's where I see those feelings coming from. But I will tell you, if you only like certain types of content in this game, say you're somebody who got in for the story, so you picked up this game, you've got like 300 hours of progression, it's amazing, and then you come shooting out the other end. The idea of, like, I think of, for just an example, I think of Lamatad as a very talented raider. I don't think that's a wildly spicy statement. And I have been watching him do DSR Prog. He's literally in DSR Prog on my other monitor right now. I'm watching them. They're pushing. Please get... They've seen Phase 7. Just get that clear, man. When I watch him, he is not, like, the one carrying that party. Which means the other 7 people are probably, give or take, also pretty talented players. And so when you have 8 pretty talented players that are like-minded, all working on this content, y'all, yes, the world first groups are like, oh, it took us like 100 hours. Lamatad's not a slouch. And he estimated when they got to P7 that he was already somewhere over 200 hours in. So when you look at somebody who cleared story for 300 hours and was getting hit with just, you know, oh my god, I loved Heavensward, I loved Crystal Tower, I loved Omega, Shadowbringers blew my world, Endwalker changed my life. And then it's like, okay, now go find 7 other like-minded individuals, set aside time, which ideally is more than once a week, so you're not just knocking the dust off, put in time together, where you all have to be online, like-minded at the same time, and 190 to 200 hours in, you technically, as of that point, don't have anything to show yet because you haven't gotten a clear. You've learned a lot, you've gotten better, but you don't have anything to show clear. I would say that this example is thrown out a lot. Brian and I have done it, where we just say, like, well, think about all the content in this game. Look at how big the achievement log is. But the counterpoint that's been given to us that I think is very valid is, then let's go back and change the original complaint. The complaint was there's no content in the game. Perhaps it's a wording issue. Sometimes it's just a communication error. Quasi is hearing, there's no content in the game. And he's like, what are you talking about? There's so much content in this game. Valid. What if we change what the commenter said to, there's not any more of the type of content I like? And all of a sudden that brings it way down. When you start to say, okay, instead of the 15 types of content in this game, that's just an arbitrary number, you know, remove ultimates, boom, there goes one. Remove savage, boom, there goes one. Remove glamour, because glamour's not my end game, and so therefore G-pose goes with it, boom, there goes one. I don't really care for mounts outside of the ones I like, so I already have the fat black chocobo, so I'm good. Boom, there goes one. All of a sudden you get down and you can find that somebody really only likes MSQ and Beast Tribes and working with their friend on their free company house. Okay, well, from that person's perspective, if those 3 systems are not addressed in a patch, you know, for example, 6.1 or 6.15, where those 3 pieces together got like 3 hours of content, 4 hours of content, and that's supposed to last 4 months, it is very understandable why that player who maybe is just catching up on story and went from playing 3 hours every night after work comes shooting out their other end, and the patch comes out and they sit down and they put in their 3 hours, and then it's like, well, wait 2 more months, and then there's another 3 hours, and then you're done for another 2 months. And so I just want to stop when, like, people say ultimate. As somebody that's never cleared an ultimate, I can say that the desire to take on an Ultimate. Ultimate is not a cure-all. I respect people who, I've probably watched enough Ultimate that I should have tried one by now. But, like, in all seriousness, there are a lot of people that just don't. I respect that content's in game. I love, God, I hope there's another one. I don't see how they do it by 6.3, but that's amazing. But that's not a cure-all. So I think he's going to hit on some better cure-alls, but that one is his first one out of the gate. I think is probably the weakest of the examples he's going to use.
You can also go back and do the old ultimates, which by the way still gives you really good rewards. The weapons have a timeless look. Those shiny glamours can be used for many years to come. Definitely worth putting in effort to get them. By the way, as a quick point, raiding is what I think a lot of people use to stay in touch with their friends in the game. They log in at least once a week. It's a predefined hours in the week, and they log on, they have a good banter with their friends and their static. Now you might say, well, raiding is not my cup of tea. I don't really like to socialize with people. Aha, then there's a lot of other content that is solo play. You can be a collector. You can collect minions, tons of them. You can collect glamour. You can forge the best looking glamour plates for yourself. Some of which have very obscure pieces that requires you to farm a certain dungeon or go to the gold saucer and get some work done. And guess what? After that, you can spend so much time on G-pose figuring out how to take the perfect picture for your Warrior of Light. There's so many.
Not to pivot this into another video, but one of the things I would love to see is a better glamour system. It's been long requested. I think a lot of times the request gets received or given as just more glamour plates. Just more plates is fine. But in general, what I would say is we honestly at this point need to rebuild it from the ground up. I think it was built with the best of intentions in ARR. But at this point, I would say looking to games like Guild Wars and WoW, there needs to be more of this ability to kind of collect. Because he talks about this, but the inventory management component of what he's describing is fairly large for people that get very into this. Glamour's not my end game, but for people that it is, adding slots at a rate that's less than we add, you know, glamours, and then adding classes, and that makes you need more plates every single time. They've come a long way with the glamour system, but at this point, it feels like they're just bolting things onto this like Frankenstein of a system, and they're like, I guess put one more plate right here, and it would be a lot cleaner if they would just re-envision the system from the ground up. There's some weird elements of it, like the fact that our armory chest is like storing that's your axe, the one you got in ARR, that's that axe, and it doesn't need to be, because all other axes of that item ID look identical. And so there's like a data component that is storing more information that is necessary. You know, it's kind of like if you stored a digital file, a digital JPEG on Dropbox, it wouldn't matter if they issued another copy of that JPEG off of Google. It's not the same as like if I put a Polaroid in a safety deposit box that, like, you know, me and my best friend from high school signed. When I open that safety deposit box, I want that Polaroid back, the exact one with our signatures on the back and our thumbprints on the side. That's my Polaroid. But Glamour doesn't need to be that. And so at this point, I would love to see that system kind of reinvented.
Position, so many camera angles, different kinds of lighting you can use. For the more advanced users, you would even dabble into color theory and using filters and all these things. But I'm not done, there's more. There's a whole triple triad mini game within the Gold Saucer that you can collect all the cards for, which will reward you a really rare mount. And speaking about mounts, have you thought about collecting mounts? All the different mounts from the different EX trials, all of which comes with their very own OST. When you ride the mount, you can get involved in fates, some of which rewards you really cool glamour on mounts. Or you can go off on the deep end to do Heaven on High or Palace of the Dead. And oh, I forgot to mention there's also PvP that is very popular recently, especially Crystalline Conflict. Again, you might say, well, I don't want to play multiplayer. Well, there's crafting too, and there's professions. You can go fishing, you can make money off the market board, and then you can use your money and figure out how to decorate the dream home of your own. And you can say, well, I don't own a home because I'm unlucky with the lottery system. Well, you can get an apartment. You can practice in the apartment. And after doing all those things, if you're still bored, you can learn new jobs. Heck, you can even roleplay with them. And if that's not good enough, there's still Eureka, there's Posture. And oh, by the way, did I mention treasure hunts? A fun way to make money. Look, folks, I doubt there's many people, only a handful of people probably has all the achievements in the game. It is unfair to say something has no content when you choose not to do the content. And by the way, I totally respect the fact that some people don't like certain types of content. And there's nothing wrong with it, it's all personal preference. Some people just don't like raiding, some people don't like PvP.
And so to marry what he just said with what he said right before that, I would say then, if those people say there's no content, what I believe the comments that he's quoting are trying to communicate is there's none of the content that meets my preferences.
Completely fine. The more important question is, have you really given it a fair shot? And I feel like a lot of people, they don't bother moving out of their comfort zone to try new content because they are apprehensive about what lies in the road ahead. You know, they don't know who they'll meet in the party finder. They might be nasty to them. They don't want to get into crafting because it's like learning new things. They don't want to try PvP because it's all very competitive. They don't really want to join FCs because, well, they don't want to interact with other people because maybe they had a bad experience socially in the game. There's many reasons why people feel that way, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But I guess the question to ask yourself at this point, if there's content in the game you haven't tried and you immediately conclude there's no content, doesn't sound very fair. But I think if you're paying a subscription for the game, you definitely owe it to yourself to at least try. Try it for an hour, try the new activity for an hour before concluding that you don't like something. Most of the time, if people are honest with themselves about why they're not trying certain types of content, things they haven't done before, I think the honest answer is that they're actually burnt out, which brings
I think that's really fair. I will also say that, like, your taste will change over time. And so a game this large, while at first maybe you picked up the game in ARR Heavensward and all you liked about it was Savage style content. You only liked the 8-man content, maybe the Alliance raids, anything where there was a large group of people all working towards a common goal, slaying a boss. Maybe that's your thing, and I think that's really valid. That's a valid way to play 14. I story skipped all the way to Shadowbringers, and people were like, you can't like this game if you're skipping the story. How can you like a Final Fantasy game if you don't like the story? Because I actually thought a lot of the other stuff was really fun too. And so, you know, I just enjoyed playing a game with my friends, and people liking the story and not being able to imagine their journey without it doesn't nullify the fact that I did enjoy it without it. That's my journey and I enjoyed it. But what I will say is then Shadowbringers got me into the story. I tried restarting ARR and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to play all the way back through. And it didn't quite stick again. I got further, but it didn't quite stick again. And so then Endwalker came out and I enjoyed the Endwalker story. And so now I've done Shadowbringers and Endwalker, and now I've gone back and I'm going back through and I'm really enjoying story. I just finished Crystal Tower. I met some people for the first time that I've already kind of like seen what happens to them in the future, and so now I have all these questions about the in-between, and I'm looking forward to getting into Heavensward. I'm looking forward into doing Binding Coils. I'm looking forward into Omega. My gosh, after doing the 6.15 content, there were just so many questions, and so I'm doing things kind of out of order. So the previous content in the game is a prequel for me, and it's my journey. And so what I would say is, if you tried Savage content when you first picked up the game, maybe it's been a while. Maybe you have been here a while. What I think Wuzzy's hitting on that's fair here is maybe give it another shot. Maybe go visit Rin Karagani or Papakiyomi's or Lama Todd's community and ask some questions. Get into a Savage group. Maybe go to one of the Discords where there's people that are happy to kind of help you through that. Maybe go be involved in like Brian Ricardo's community or Quasi's community when they're doing Crystalline Conflict, because I found both incredibly fun to lurk in and watch Crystalline Conflict. You know, if you're just getting into story for the first time, go hang out in a Pyromancer stream, or go hang out in like a Sebi Webby stream if you're like, you know what this story needs is an M rating. And they're delightful, and there's so much there that maybe wouldn't have appealed to you before. But it's also okay not to like things, which I think he is saying very well here. I, for example, don't like sweet potatoes, and my mom made me try sweet potatoes every single year at Thanksgiving growing up. Every single year. I didn't like them when I was 5. I didn't like them when I was 6. I didn't like them when I was 13. I didn't like them when I was 22. I didn't like them when I was 30. And so at a certain point, it's like, why? Like, so now when I go, I'm just like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it, Mom. I'm well into my 30s. I know I don't like them. Yes, my tastes have changed in a lot of foods, but I don't like sweet potatoes. And that's okay. I think that's what's going to bring him to kind of his next point as to, you know, when you see people who aren't saying, hey, I think Final Fantasy is really broken right now, they're instead doing other things. Sebi Webby has been crushing Final Fantasy VII lately, and it's one of his favorite games, and he's replaying through with just brilliant voice acting. And, you know, you see Preach doing all these other Final Fantasy titles, which is amazing. And so it's a great time to say, like, well, if what you like about Final Fantasy XIV has run out within Final Fantasy XIV, where is that thing in other games? Because this is not the only game out there that's ever told a good story. This is not the only game out there that's ever had fun raiding or has had a unique cosmetic system or anything like that. This is a game that is incredibly generous at letting people play other times, and he's going to say that much better than I did.
Brings me to my next point. Let's face it, variety is indeed the spice of life. When you force yourself to do the same thing every day and expecting a different outcome, I think Albert Einstein defined that as insanity. It's the same thing in Final Fantasy.
As just an interesting side note, doing the same thing and expecting a different result has also been attributed to Benjamin Franklin and Mark Twain. It's a comment that was largely popularized in like the 1980s, which when you hear those names, you're like, that's a significant distance from Benjamin Franklin, and so just an interesting side note. I don't know who actually came up with it, but he's like, I think, and it's like, yeah, that's what it's always attributed to is Albert Einstein, but like there are others that have also had that quote attributed to them.
Fantasy XIV. If you log on every day, hoping that your experience today will be better without doing anything different, you will definitely not find your answer there. And over time, you become disillusioned, become jaded, and you think that there might be nothing in store for me in this game anymore. But the truth is, sometimes you need to take a break, like what Yoshi P says. For the people who follow me, you know I've been playing Elden Ring at the start of the year. And what's the first thing I said when I came back to Final Fantasy XIV on stream? I said that Final Fantasy XIV looks so different. And mind you, this is after like a 1-week break of playing Elden Ring No Life. I said Final Fantasy XIV's color palette looks so cheerful, and I even asked chat whether they made graphical improvements to the way the text is rendered, because it looked way sharper to me. The truth is nothing has changed. I merely took a step back from the game, I gained some new perspective, and when I re-log in Final Fantasy XIV after a break, it feels familiar yet different at the same time. That's the power of taking a break, gaining some perspective. It's completely okay to take a break. And then naturally I know the counter argument that some comments have is that, well, actually, if Yoshi P and team did more content in the game, if they produce content more quickly, then I don't have to take a break because there will always be content. Some even...
The counterpoint to that is, as a new player, it would feel so bad to come into a game and new players that are like getting off work and they're ignoring their friends and their family and they're just addicted to this game and they're diving in deep. Imagine the feeling if you put in 40 hours, 50 hours in a week, and you're doing that multiple weeks in a month, and you're doing all this, and you're falling behind. So there is something important about making sure this is an attainable amount of content. The new player experience is already incredibly long. It's a very big ask. Of course, those of us on the other side are like, it's worth it, it's worth it. But you have to realize you're standing on the top of the mountain, looking back, saying it's worth it. To the person at the bottom, they are looking up that mountain. And so it is a big, big, big grind. And imagine if that mountain was growing faster than they could climb it. So I don't know that that's something we should hope for, is for them to be able to produce content at the rate that we can consume it. I don't know that that's something that we actually want.
Even go to the lengths of saying that, hey, Yoshi P and team is actually artificially stretching out the content, drip feeding us the content so that we will continue to stay subscribed. The truth is, if they really wanted to maximize your subscription fees, if they really wanted to keep you in the game for the purposes of profit maximization, Yoshi P would have never encouraged people to take breaks from Final Fantasy XIV, period. Like, some of the responses and comments I've read is actually pretty incredible. Like, for example, this forum post. The person is suggesting that there are other MMORPGs like World of Warcraft that is in a very bad spot, but at least they have repeatable content. And let me address this as my next point. What the person is trying to say is that he or she is actually willing to accept a bad gameplay experience simply because he or she is able to whittle away time by doing something they might not necessarily enjoy, but at least there's something to do. And maybe in their head it's because they justify that, well, I paid a subscription for this MMORPG, at least the MMORPG is keeping me busy. But the question is, are you really enjoying yourself? If you're gonna do something that you know is in a bad gameplay spot, does it really make sense to force yourself to be doing this?
Retention mechanics on their own work on a part of our lizard brain that like naturally likes to see like a plant grow or raise a child or raise a pet. And those are not equivalent things, by the way. But that desire to see something grow and mature that we've invested in, that's a natural desire. The problem is this is not real. And so what can happen is one day it just snaps and the illusion breaks and you're like, oh, I've been yeeting my time into nothing. So retention mechanics work right up until they don't. So they keep your concurrence really high. So if all we care about is concurrent viewers, you know, I got the same number of viewers on my game this month as I did last month and the month before, that's fine. But if we want to view the actual life cycle of like how many people are actually enjoying this, how many people are actually thriving in the game, then maybe we should let the game stand on its own instead of masking that, where you can't separate out. When you look at the analytics, if retention mechanics are in play, and there are retention mechanics in Final Fantasy XIV, especially for people that own houses, you cannot leave. But and those of you that have tried garden plots, those of you that have tried beast tribes, those of you that feel like you need to do your weekly hunts, we have dailies, we have, people that are trying to get through their mentor roulettes. There are things that are meant to feel very grindy. Any of you that want your pterodactyl mount, that's a grind. The grinds are there if you want them, and they make you feel like you need to play either a huge chunk of time or a little bit constantly. So they're there in the game if you're looking for them, but they're not forced. And so the problem is, if you view this as like a business, one of the things they would have to do is they would have to dig through the analytics, and you would say, okay, player A played 8 hours last week. Player B played 8 hours this week. One of those players was having fun. How do I tell the difference? How do I know which player was having fun? And so retention mechanics are not healthy for the game because they don't give them an active feedback metric, as opposed to, hey, people didn't, with concurrent views, went down. That tells us something. That tells us they're either more interested in another game, or they're less interested in our game, or both. In addition to that, like, getting away from concurrence and making the content stand on its own lets you know what's working. And that's all before just the ethics of, like, should you make people stick around that don't want to be there? Should you have them hostage when they can just turn their subscription off? And so I don't know that this is something that we want. I understand that we want there to be a reward. I get that we want there to be content. I get that. But I would just hesitate to say that what we want is something that gives me something to just do. I mean, Square Enix puts out mobile games. Like, if you just want to feel like you gotta log in every day and grind something, there are other Square Enix titles that would be more than happy to oblige. There's a lot of Square Enix titles in Game Pass if you just want to crank through old Final Fantasy. If you want unlimited Square Enix properties in your life and that's the only publisher you want to consider, there are ways to be engrossed in Square Enix. I just don't know that Final Fantasy XIV retention mechanics is that thing.
Even though it seems to consume your time. Because if you want to do so, there's a cheaper and even free alternative. You can basically paint the wall and watch the paint dry, or you can watch the grass grow. Because on both sides, they are both not optimal entertaining experiences. But yet one is free, so technically you should do that. I feel like a lot of the people who come to Final Fantasy XIV, they have this preconceived notion that...
I do think that's a little dismissive. Like, in general, I agree with what Quasi's saying there. In general, our points are the same. But what I will say is, like, for somebody to say, I pay for a game, just imagine you go to, like, your favorite hamburger shop and you pay for a hamburger, and then you go the next day and you pay for a hamburger, and then you go the next day and they're like, hey, we're out of hamburgers, do you want a chicken sandwich? And you're like, well, I really would prefer a hamburger, but I guess. And then you go the next day and they say, we don't have any sandwiches, and so they have a we're closed sign. There is this whole, like, we'll just go eat somewhere else. I don't want to eat somewhere else. I want to eat what I like from you, and you're not making that possible. And so there is this idea, well, you should just be happy to pay somebody else, but, like, that doesn't fix it. That doesn't fix the core hunger. And if Square Enix were to come out and say what Quasi just said, it would come across as incredibly insulting that they were like, well, you should just care for other games. And so I do think there's a gentler way to phrase it than just telling somebody to watch grass grow. I think in general, saying, I understand that what you're saying is you would be willing, what they're saying underneath is you would be willing to take a lower quality content to increase the quantity of content. And I understand that as a core message. I respect that. And I think the total quantity of content per patch has been very, very large. Now, it has also diversified across a huge number of types of content. We're going to be having Criterion Dungeons, Island Sanctuary. That's 2 new things. Doctor's Grand Endeavor, whole new thing. Hildebrand's back in full force. The relic systems have grown to include, like, their own raids. PvP now has, like, a new mode again, and Rival Wings is coming back. So, like, the number of types has expanded, but I do understand that you're saying, hey, if you could just come out with more of the type of content I like, I would be willing to take that as a lower quantity. I don't think the response is, no, you should just go watch grass grow, because adding bad content is not acceptable. I think there is something fair there. I would just argue that, like, it's also valid that Yoshi P says, I respect that you're saying that. I don't have any interest in lowering my quality. And so, like, I think both sides have a valid point of view. The disconnect is where the frustration happens. Not that either side is completely out of left field.
They are trained by other MMORPGs to think like that, which is, oh, an MMORPG when I hit max level, there must be daily repeatable grinds that I can do. The equivalent of this in Final Fantasy XIV will be something like, oh, to gear up my character, I need to do daily roulettes every day for a certain currency, and this currency can then be turned into a certain vendor that gives me an upgrade stone, and there's like 10 levels of upgrade stone for every single slot in my inventory. So
if you want what he's describing right now, if you're like, yes, that's exactly what I want, try to complete your challenge log, as much of it as you can every week. Fill your tomestones, which will naturally be done by completing your challenge log. Go do like your weekly custom deliveries, complete your Wondrous Tales, and try to get the mythical 3-line doesn't exist. And any of you that say it does, you're hackers. And you know, start adding retention mechanics. They are available in this game, and they do give rewards. So if you're looking for that extrinsic reward and you're like, you know what, I don't care if the content is good, I don't care if the reward is that helpful, I just want to feel character progression and have a reason to log in, the retention mechanics are there. I will tell you that I have shied away from those because the reason I quit World of Warcraft was I got burned out on retention mechanics. And so I have always been afraid of letting Final Fantasy turn into where I look up and I have the same feelings toward Final Fantasy that I had towards WoW, when really a lot of my feelings towards WoW, now that I've gone back, I realize a lot of my feelings towards WoW were because the way the game was presented was incentivizing me, and I was choosing to fall into that incentivization, and I was playing the way that led to that burnout. There are other ways to play WoW. They are not as popular. They are not the meta, but they are there, and I enjoy it a great deal more. But really what I'm doing is I'm playing WoW like I learned to play 14. But if you want to play it like WoW, they are there. You can absolutely do this stuff. You can set rules for yourself, like there's a dungeon that has a 2% chance at a minion. Go run that once a day until that minion drops. And so you can set these kind of guidelines for yourself to just start working towards things. If retention's your goal, the challenge log is a great place to start, if that's your goal. If it's not, that is wildly optional.
So that gives me a reason to do the roulettes every day. That way I'm not capped out on gear progression that quickly. But as someone who has played World of Warcraft for 10 years, I can tell you this is artificial progression. It's not real progression. It's basically artificial time gating. Yoshi P and team's philosophy is they don't want to time gate content because that is not sustainable in the long run. People will eventually churn. They will realize that this is not fun and people leave. Just look at what's happening with World of Warcraft.
They do time gate Savage gear. They do time gate Alliance Raid gear. They do time gate tomestones. And those are all three, depending on the player, those can all three be considered a form of progression.
External systems for many years, enough said. So they're really front-loading the content to you. And if you complete the content fast, you have 100% right to stop your subscription, take a break, go play something else. That's completely okay. In fact, they're encouraging you to do so. The last main point I'll mention here, I do not know of any MMORPG community that is as accepting as Final Fantasy XIV when it comes to playing other games externally to Final Fantasy XIV. In fact, so many...
Especially if those games are not other MMOs. There is some pushback from certain members of the community if that other game is World of Warcraft or New World, something that they view as a threat. In general, within the MMO space, the ones that I have seen are widely accepted if acceptance is the goal. Our Destiny is a very good pairing in that it plays completely differently, but you have those grind elements, and so you can kind of come and go. Guild Wars is an incredibly good pairing, in my opinion.
FF14 friends of mine are playing other video games right now and they are having fun amongst themselves. They're playing V-Rising, they're all looking forward to the new Monster Hunter Rise, and they see the content lull between patches as the perfect way to catch up on previous video games they have missed out. For example, when Endwalker was launched, it was the end of the year. So many new titles were released then. Maybe you were so obsessed with the MSQs you didn't get to play some of them. Now is the time to go back and work on the backlog. And when the time comes for 6.2 to be released, Island Sanctuary rolls around, new features in the game to be tried out, we can all return to Eorzea at your own pace, and it will still feel like home. That's the
Keep in mind, 6.2 people. The live letter is going to go. The initial live letter is going to go over all the content in 6.2. 6.2 is a 4-month experience, so keep in mind, just because it's coming in 6.2 doesn't mean it's not the half patch, which would kick it out 2 months.
thing about Final Fantasy XIV. It's liberating. It doesn't hold you back. It doesn't anchor you to the game. It doesn't demand that you log in every day. And that is liberating. Capitalize on that. Before Final Fantasy XIV, I never knew that kind of freedom. I was always on a hamster wheel. If I don't log on today, what will happen? If I don't log on today, I'll lose my spot in the raid. I was driven to log in out of fear that I will fall behind. Don't you want to log into an MMORPG where you actually look forward to playing? Where your primary motivation is a place of positive emotions rather than negative emotions? And for some of these haters who say there's no content in the game, and maybe that's your answer, you should try other MMORPGs, and maybe you will see that maybe you have been taking Final Fantasy XIV for granted. You might think that Quasi is crazy and always talking about World of Warcraft being bad. But maybe you played World of Warcraft, you will now look back on Final Fantasy XIV and say, okay, I actually like the way they roll out content better than.
Or maybe initially you'll get that initial rush again. Being new in an MMO is fun. Somebody who's brand new to World of Warcraft today can have an incredibly positive experience. They don't have the bitterness of being let down by having a set of expectations not work out that way. And so, like, you can... Like, there is also a value to going to games, even if the veteran established population feels like currently this current patch is very frustrating. That's fine. That's not even going to be the patch that's current by the time you get caught up. So, like, that might be it. One of the things I do struggle with within any one community is when people say, I exclusively play this game is all I need. And then that very same person turns around and says, this is the greatest game ever, it's way better than any other game, but they don't have another point of reference. They don't have the ability to say, it's better than this game, and this is why I prefer it. They just say, I know it's better because I picked my tribe, and my tribe is the best one. Quasi always speaks about it in comparison to World of Warcraft, when he's making comparison to other MMOs, because that's where he has a wealth of knowledge. But as he spends more time in Final Fantasy, if he chooses to never go back to WoW, his World of Warcraft knowledge will slowly slide out of date. So heaven forbid Blizzard ever suddenly made 1 or 2 or 3 really good expansions in a row, or just good patches in a row. That would be something that he would either need to go read about or go learn about or hop in game to experience, or his points of comparison would slowly slide out of alignment. And so I would say, go get that point of reference. If nothing else, it'll be like his week away, where you come back and there's fresh eyes and you say, you know what? It's not a perfect solution, but when I look at the 10 solutions that other games have, now that I've gone and tried out a few and read and watched about a few more, I realize that, you know what? Every solution has pros and cons, and I appreciate the one that Final Fantasy selected.
Than World of Warcraft. Maybe that's a solution. And let me remind you again, the grass is not always greener on the other side. Sometimes the grass is dead on the other side. I came from a world where sometimes I have to wait for more than 1 year, yes, more than 1 year, for a major content patch to land in World of Warcraft.
Well, now, just to be contrarian, I will say that Savage Raiders had a very rough stretch in Final Fantasy, from the last Savage of Shadowbringers to the first Savage of Endwalker. So if we're just gonna throw stones, I think there's a lot of stones we can throw at WoW, and so just I in 99% agree, and I'm standing behind Quasi as he throws that stone. But as I look around and I realize not a single person threw a stone at 14, I will say, like, that's the counterpoint. If we're gonna be fair is there are individual people that care about one particular aspect of Final Fantasy that they also have had to wait incredibly long periods of time, especially when you look over the 2020 2021 years, where, like, every studio responded differently. Some struggled a lot more than others. I think WoW has been punched in the face a lot of times over the last 2 years, and many of those punches are well earned. But I will say, like, that does not mean Final Fantasy is without blemish. They're not getting held up as the champion, and they were not touched. They're getting held up as the champion because they were hit in the face a lot less during that time frame.
And over here between 6.1 and 6.2 is only a gap of 4 months. Roughly, and people are already losing their minds and complaining about this, which is baffling. It's easy to complain about things in a vacuum, but when you take a step back and gain some perspective, you might actually finally see it differently. I know it's a contentious topic, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. With that,
so, on the last point that he hit there, I will say there are players that are used to shorter patch cycles. They were shorter before this. There are also players that were used to more casual content, so we used to get more dungeons per patch. So, like, not all forms of content have expanded. In general, I feel the patches are larger and of a higher quality than they've ever been before. But if you are not interested in the type of content, say you don't like Bosja and Zadnor and you didn't like Eureka, it would be incredibly frustrating to watch them drop the number of dungeons from patch from, I think it started at 3 and then it went to 2 and then it went to 1. only to see a ton of instance content locked behind a system that you don't engage with. And if you don't like Deep Dungeon, you've been kind of like good riddance now that Heaven on High is gone or is over and not being updated anymore. Thank God. And then they turn around and say with 6.3 we're getting another one. And so like there's a fair bit of kind of concern from people that are defending their one part of Final Fantasy when they watch those resources get spread over a wider and more diverse way of set of ways to play. But in general, I think he's hitting the point on the head. I'm just kind of expanding on that point and a little bit nitpicky.
That's it. A very big thank you for helping us cross 60,000 subscribers on this channel. What a massive milestone this is for this community. If you like the content on this channel, make sure to click the button in the middle of the screen to subscribe to the channel. Help us march towards 100,000 subscribers.
Very cool. Thank you, Quasi. I've really enjoyed watching a lot of your content. I was first introduced through a reaction where I didn't even know who you were, and I came in with a blind reaction. And it has been really fun to watch his content grow and his knowledge base of the game grow. And it's just been really fun to kind of watch Quasi take what was a very well-established way of doing things and bring a fresh energy to 14. And he's not alone in that. The number of new faces has been absolutely incredible. What Eorzean Archives is doing with lore is wonderful. What Ponto is doing just from the ability to have this like community. He's been around, but like what's happening over there is absolutely delightful on Twitch. And so there are just these huge variety of creators that are really, they may have been around or they may not, and either way they're growing now, and it's been absolutely incredible to see more types of content. More content. I absolutely adore the number of creators growing in this space. And for as much, and Brian and I have said that over the years, I think that has sometimes been received as only creators we always agree with or only creators we like. No. I will say, like, I'm trying very hard to only react to creators I like, and I'm trying very hard to spend my time consuming creators I like, but I want there to be more of all kinds. I'm not looking for the Final Fantasy XIV community to be shaped in my image. More of all kinds. So even if somebody is not my particular taste, I respect what they do, and I think there should be more of it, just because like I think 14 is a better space when we are fleshing out the rest of it with communities that are surrounded by creators or not. Places like Discords and Reddits, it doesn't require a creator to be a valid and wonderful and delightful way to expand on the game. And I think that, in general, I think this game is a lot better when you share it with other people. Kinda.